The stagecoach came into Abilene at dusk like it was running from the devil. The horses were wild-eyed and covered in sweat, their hooves pounding the dirt hard enough to shake the air. Sheriff Dawson McLeod stood on the boardwalk outside his office, raising his tin cup halfway to his mouth when he froze. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. The driver's seat was empty. No man holding the reins. No voice shouting to control the team. The reins dragged across the ground as the coach swerved straight toward the center of town. Dawson dropped his cup. It hit the wood with a dull clang, and he was already running into the road. He waved his arms, yelling for people to get back. The horses barreled toward him, foam flying from their mouths. Deputy Clarence Renutter burst out of the general store and ran to help. Together they grabbed bridles, pulling with all their strength. The horses fought, rearing and trembling, but finally they slowed to a shaking halt. Dawson's chest tightened as he stepped toward the coach. Bullet holes covered the wooden sides. One rear wheel leaned at an angle like it was close to breaking. The sun was sinking fast, casting long shadows across the wrecked stagecoach. Then he heard it. A woman's muffled cries coming from inside. Scared, desperate cries. Dawson reached for the door and froze. A heavy iron padlock kept it sealed from the outside. This was no robbery. Someone had locked a woman inside and left her there to die. Clarence climbed up onto the driver's seat, then looked down with a pale face. Blood stained the leather. Too much blood for a man to walk away from. Dawson pressed his hand to the door. "Ma'am, hold on, we're getting you out." Her voice came through the wood in broken words. "Please. Please." Clarence ran to grab a crowbar. Dawson braced himself. Together they jammed the tool under the lock and pushed with all their strength. The metal groaned, then snapped. The door flew open. A woman collapsed into Dawson's arms. Her dress was torn. Rope burns marked her wrists. Dirt covered her face, but beneath it he saw she was young, maybe in her early 20s, with chestnut hair falling from a loose braid. She clung to him like she was afraid the world might fall apart again at any moment. Her whole body shook. Dawson held her steady, speaking softly, trying to calm her while questions hammered his mind. Who would do this? Why? What monster locks a woman in a stagecoach and sends it into the wild with no driver? Her name was Caroline Bennett. She was a mail-order bride, traveling from Dodge City to marry Duncan Farnsworth, one of Abilene's richest businessmen. Her journey had begun calm enough. The stagecoach carried Caroline, the driver Joseph Montgomery, and a passenger named Bill Harrington. 3 hours out of Dodge City, the attack came. Masked riders surrounded the coach, firing without warning. Caroline had thought it was a robbery. But the men hadn't asked for money. They had dragged the driver from his seat. She heard him scream, then a gunshot. Everything went silent. The other passenger was pulled out next. She heard him struggle. Then they turned to her. They tied her wrists. The ropes cut her skin. A masked man leaned close and told her if she made a sound, she would end up like the driver. Then they shoved her inside and locked the door from the outside. Hours passed in that hot wooden box. She cried until her voice cracked. At some point, the coach began to move again, jerking across the land. Through a small tear in the curtain, she had seen the reins tied loosely around the seat. No one driving. Only horses running on their own. She thought she would die. But somehow the horses reached Abilene. Dawson listened closely as she spoke. Something didn't fit. Why kidnap a mail-order bride only to leave her locked away in a runaway coach? Where was Bill Harrington? Why leave the driver dead but not her? Before Dawson could question her further, the doors of his office swung open and Duncan Farnsworth entered. His fine suit looked untouched by dust. His dark hair was neat, and his polished boots showed money and power. When he saw Caroline, he rushed to her side with a face filled with worry. Caroline seemed unsure, grateful but uneasy. Farnsworth insisted she stay at his mansion where she would be safe, cared for, guarded. His voice was gentle, his words smooth, yet Dawson saw something cold flicker behind his eyes. Something calculating. Dawson had worn a badge long enough to know when a man was hiding something. The next morning, he and Clarence followed the Stagecoach's trail to the ambush site. It took 2 hours before they saw signs of the attack. Scattered belongings, dark dried stains in the dirt. Clarence found the driver's body quickly. Joseph Montgomery had been shot in the back and buried in a rush. This was no robbery. This was execution. Not far from him lay a second shallow grave. An unknown man. Dawson searched the pockets and found a folded note. Words scrawled in rough handwriting. Meet Farnsworth. Midnight. Canyon Ridge. The name hit Dawson like a punch. Duncan Farnsworth. Found at a murder scene. Bullets. Graves. A battered hat with the initials BH for Bill Harrington. 6 horse tracks. A planned ambush. Dawson stared at the note, the truth settling heavy in his chest. Caroline Bennett was in far more danger than she knew. Dawson and Clarence rode back toward Abilene, with rising tension pushing at Dawson's thoughts. Each clue pointed to something darker, something carefully planned. Caroline was resting at Duncan Farnsworth's mansion. If Farnsworth's name was found at a murder site, she was in the last place she should be. The moment they reached town, Dawson went straight to the mansion. A servant opened the door with a nervous look, but Dawson's badge got him inside. The parlor was filled with expensive rugs and polished wood. Farnsworth entered with a practiced smile, acting like a concerned groom. Dawson asked simple questions about the stagecoach. Had Farnsworth sent riders to look for Caroline when the coach went missing? Farnsworth's answers were smooth, too smooth. His hands fidgeted. His eyes darted away from Dawson's. When Dawson mentioned Bill Harrington by name, Farnsworth's smile faltered. The other passenger was a Pinkerton detective. You know him. Farnsworth forced a stiff smile. By reputation only. I worked with the Pinkertons once, years ago. Never met him. Dawson didn't need a confession. He knew the man was lying. Later that night, long after the lamps had been blown out across town, Dawson heard a knock at his office door. When he opened it, Caroline stood there, wrapped in a dark cloak, shaking. "Sheriff, I need to tell you something." He brought her inside. She looked frightened, the fear sitting deep in her eyes. "Dawson, I heard Duncan arguing with a man tonight. I didn't mean to listen, but I couldn't sleep. They were talking about the Pinkerton detective. They said he was still alive. They said he is hidden at Canyon Ridge." Dawson's heart jumped. Bill Harrington, alive. The second grave must have held another man. Caroline described the person Farnsworth had been speaking with. The description matched Jedediah Friedmont, a known outlaw leader. If Farnsworth was dealing with Friedmont, everything made sense now. The attack, the murders, the lies. Caroline twisted her hands together. "Sheriff, I am frightened. Duncan has been polite and kind, but there is something cold in him. I do not think he ever wanted a wife. Not really." Dawson sent Caroline to stay with Madame Ruby at the Mercantile. It was the safest place in town, filled with watchful women who protected their own. Then he sent Clarence to wire a telegram to the Pinkerton agency. By morning, Marshal Wyatt Herp arrived. He rode in like he had already guessed the truth. He had been tracking Farnsworth for months. The Pinkertons suspected him of running smuggling operations through the territory. Bill Harrington had been sent to gather proof. Farnsworth must have discovered the investigation. The ambush was planned to kill Harrington. But when they realized Caroline was with him, things changed. They needed Caroline alive to keep up the appearance of a normal mail-order marriage. Killing her too soon would raise suspicion. The plan was to lock her away and retrieve her later. But the horses had run wild and brought her straight into Abilene. Herp looked Dawson in the eye. "We ride tonight. We take Canyon Ridge and bring Harrington back alive." They gathered a small posse of trusted men. When night fell, they rode out from town, following the rocky path up toward the ridge. Stars shone cold above them. The air grew sharper as the land rose. Canyon Ridge was a jagged cut in the earth, filled with steep rocks and hidden caves. As they approached, Dawson saw small flickers of light ahead, campfires. They dismounted quietly and crept forward. Men lounged around the fires with rifles resting on their knees. And standing near the largest fire, dressed no longer like a polished gentleman, but like a man deep in his crimes, stood Duncan Farnsworth. Dawson felt anger burn hot in his chest. Farnsworth paced and pointed, snarling at Jedediah Friedmont. Friedmont argued back. They didn't know they were surrounded. Herp signaled the posse to spread out. Dawson moved with him toward a dark cave at the edge of the camp. A single guard stood before it. Herp knocked him out quickly and dragged him behind a boulder. They slipped into the cave with their pistols drawn. Inside, by lamplight, they found Bill Harrington, bound, bruised, but alive. His eyes blazed with anger and relief. Dawson cut the ropes while Herp watched the entrance. Harrington pointed at a satchel in the shadows. That bag has everything. Letters, records, names. Enough to bring Farnsworth down forever. Dawson grabbed it, feeling the weight of it. The weight of truth. But before they could leave, shouts exploded outside. They had been seen. Gunfire tore through the canyon as the posse opened fire from behind rocks. Men cursed and scattered. The night shook with the sound of rifles and pounding boots. Dawson ran out of the cave with Harrington and Herp. The battle spread across the ridge, sparks from gunfire lighting up the dark. He spotted Farnsworth turning to run for his horse. Dawson sprinted after him. Farnsworth reached his mount and pulled himself up, but Dawson threw himself forward in a tackle, dragging both man and horse to the ground. The two men rolled across the dirt. Farnsworth fought wildly, landing blows with surprising strength born of fear. Dawson punched back, pinned him, wrestled away his pistol, and shoved him face down into the ground. "It is over," Dawson said, breathless. Around them, the gunfight was ending. Friedmont lay wounded. His men were captured or running for their lives. Harrington limped toward Dawson holding the satchel. This will put him away for good. Dawson shackled Farnsworth's hands. The merchant glared at him with cold fury. "You have no idea what you've done. I have lawyers, connections, money." Dawson held his gaze steady. "You nearly killed an innocent woman. You won't hurt anyone else." They gathered the captured men, packed up the satchel of evidence, and by the time dawn touched the sky with pale colors, they rode back toward Abilene. Farnsworth was silent the entire way. Dawson didn't miss the hatred in the man's eyes, but he also knew hatred couldn't save him now. When they reached town, word spread fast. People lined the street to watch as Duncan Farnsworth, once the most respected man in Abilene, was led to jail in iron cuffs. Caroline stood outside Madame Ruby's shop. She wrapped her arms around herself as she watched Farnsworth walk past. For a moment he looked at her. Something cold flickered in his eyes. Then he looked away, and Caroline breathed again. For the first time since boarding that stagecoach, she felt free. Dawson stepped toward her. "Miss Bennett, you are safe now." Her voice trembled. "What happens now?" Dawson tipped his hat. "Now you get the chance to choose your own life." Caroline stayed at Madame Ruby's shop for the next several days, while the law prepared the case against Duncan Farnsworth. Each morning the townsfolk came by offering food, blankets, and warm smiles. Abilene had seen its share of trouble, but the people always came together when someone needed help. Dawson checked on her often, both as sheriff and as a man who cared more than he let on. Caroline tried to hide how shaken she was, but Dawson could see it in her eyes. She had survived a nightmare. The ropes, the heat inside the coach, the fear that she would die alone in the dark. Her hands trembled when she sewed at Madame Ruby's counter, though she tried to steady them. One afternoon, Dawson stopped by with news. Judge Sampson had signed the order. Farnsworth would be sent to federal court on charges of conspiracy, kidnapping, and murder. Bill Harrington had recovered enough to testify. The satchel of evidence was more than enough to seal the case. Caroline listened quietly, relief softening her shoulders. She let out a long breath she had been holding inside for days. "Thank you, Sheriff. Truly." Dawson nodded, his voice gentle. You are safe now. Not just safe from him. Safe to build any life you want. Caroline looked down at her hands, then at him. Sheriff, I do not know what my place is anymore. I came west, expecting to marry a man who lied to me. Now I feel lost. Dawson understood that feeling more than she knew. After the war, he had felt the same. Lost and searching for something he could not name. You do not have to decide today, he said. You just need time. Days turned into weeks. The trial came quickly. Farnsworth stood in court, no longer a powerful businessman, but a man exposed. Harrington spoke clearly and bravely, telling every detail of what he had uncovered. The financial ledgers, the secret shipments, the illegal operations. Everything was laid out plain. The jury found Farnsworth guilty on all counts. Life in prison. When the verdict was read, Caroline felt the weight she had carried finally crumble. The man she had feared, the man who had tried to own her, could never touch her again. After the trial, life in Abilene found its rhythm again. Caroline stayed at Madame Ruby's, helping in the shop. She had a natural talent with needle and thread. Soon women from all over town came to her for repairs, dresses, and small sewing jobs. She taught reading twice a week to children whose parents worked long hours. She found joy in being useful. Dawson visited often, at first under the excuse of making sure she was settling in well. But as weeks turned into months, the excuses fell away. They would sit outside on the boardwalk in the evening, watching the dusty road quiet down, talking about small things and sometimes about heavy things too. Caroline learned Dawson carried scars of his own. He spoke about the war, about the nights he woke from dreams that felt too real, about the people he could not save. Sharing those memories did not make him weaker. It made him human. Caroline shared her own fears. Not just about the stagecoach, but about trusting again, about choosing the wrong path, about building a life from nothing. The more they talked, the more they understood each other. The more they understood, the closer they grew. One warm evening they sat together on the porch at Madame Ruby's. The sky glowed orange, the light soft on the dusty street. Dawson held his hat in his hands, turning it nervously. Caroline, I know you did not come west looking for me. I know your life changed in ways you never asked for. But if you feel anything for me, I would be honored if you would consider staying in Abilene not as a visitor, but as my wife. I cannot offer riches or fine things. Only an honest life with a man who loves you. Caroline felt tears rise, but they were not from sadness. They were full of peace. Dawson, I never wanted a mansion. I wanted a chance to live freely, to choose my own path. And I choose you. Yes, 1,000 times yes. Word spread through Abilene like a summer breeze. The whole town attended their wedding. Judge Sampson officiated in the small white church. Caroline wore a dress she had sewn herself, simple but beautiful. Dawson stood at the front looking at her like she was the first sunrise he had ever seen. There was not a dry eye in the room when they said their vows. The years that followed were good ones. Caroline opened her own tailoring shop near the general store. Dawson served as sheriff for many years before being elected mayor. They raised 3 children, each with the same stubborn courage their parents shared. On warm evenings they sat together on their porch, watching the Kansas sky glow in colors that looked almost painted. They would hold hands and remember how they met, how one runaway stagecoach carrying a terrified bride changed both of their lives forever. Caroline had come west expecting to marry a stranger. Instead, she found freedom, justice, and a love that lasted.